Well, people movements in past and present. So before we talk about the present, let's talk a little bit about the past. We see a lot of people movement in our present world. Some people are happy with it, others are not so happy with it. We see a lot of movement, ethnic movement, cultural movements in the Adventist church, but actually, it's nothing new. There has always been a lot of people moving from one place to another in our world. So let's first of all look at some of these things that happened in the past. Let me see. I'm trying to now. Yeah, but before we do that, let's get our definitions correct. There are we are speaking about people that are moving, sometimes large scale, sometimes individuals. But when we talk about these various individuals, let's get our definitions straight. An immigrant is a person who moves to a new country to settle there. And of course, America has been a land of immigrants and some other countries as well. Asylum seekers is something else. It's somebody who is seeking international protection from persecutions or serious human rights violations. And so they are asking for asylum, and it usually takes quite a bit of time before their status is determined. A refugee, on the other hand, is a person who has been usually an asylum seeker and who has been granted legal protection because his reasons for moving to another country have been found seriously enough. And then there is the internally displaced person, somebody who flees his home due to conflicts, violence, disaster, but finds a place in his own country. And that actually is the greatest number of people who are moving around in the present world, internally displaced persons. How many are there today? Global estimates say that there are about 281 million international migrants at this moment who move from place to place, often seasonally because of their work. There are some 42 million people who are counted as refugees. They have been granted asylum. There are currently around the world some 8.4 million asylum seekers. Well, there are some 73 million people who have been displaced internally from one part of their country to another because of conflict situations or other problems. When we look at migrations, when streams of people going around the globe, we believe, well, of course, science has a lot to say about that, and maybe you'll hear something about that next week. But many people believe that humanity actually originated in Africa, and from there, people went in different directions around the globe, even arriving in North America and South America eventually. Out of Africa, migration may be the oldest migration movement. Other migration movements, and of course, this is very just a few things to set the historical stage. Movements in the Greek world, the Greeks who originally came from that place of southern Europe, but went and settled colonies, places, Greek colonies around the Mediterranean and around the Black Sea. They spread their civilization very effectively during a number of centuries. Then, of course, there were the Romans who went around a major part of Europe, and actually they came as far as, of course, Britain. Somewhere in Britain you still have the Wall of Hadrian. That's as far as the Romans went. The Romans went as far in my country as far as the Rhine River. North of that, that was foreign country for them, but they had colonies, they had settlements, groups of soldiers in all of the world, that part of the world that you see on this little map on the right. After the Roman time, there were the movements of the Germanic tribes, in particular the Vandals. For a number of centuries, large numbers of people moved around Europe, and that brought a totally new picture to European history. Not only in Europe were there large movements of people, but they happened also in Africa. The Bantu migrations are around the year 500, 600. There were large movements of Bantu people on the African continent. When we take a step further in history, we see the rapid expansion of what became the Islamic Empire, large groups of people moving around and bringing the Islamic culture to a major part of the Middle East and beyond. Coming closer to our own time, we think of the movement of people, in particular, of course, the Atlantic slave trade, when large numbers, millions of people, not of their own free will, but being forced to move from various places in Africa, East Africa, but particularly West Africa, going to North America and South America in particular. And the Dutch have they have apologized for their significant part in the Atlantic slave trade, bringing people in particular from Ghana and those areas to various parts in America, South America, Inter-America, North America. Talking about people who had to move, often forcefully, we think, of course, also of the Jewish diaspora. Already early on, we find that in the Old Testament. We find the captivity, Assyrians, the 10 tribes, the Babylonian captivity, the 2 tribes. The Jews further dispersed in the times of the Romans, after the destruction of Jerusalem in particular. We find soon in the Middle Ages Jewish communities across Europe, across the Middle East, and even in North Africa. In more modern times, migration of relatively large numbers of Jews to the United States, and then, of course, the return of lots of Jewish people, either religiously motivated or not, going to Israel in the period after the Holocaust. The Jewish diaspora. Significant number of Jews that went to North America, large-scale migration of Jews, 19th century, early 20th century, especially from Eastern Europe, seeking religious freedom, legal protection, and then we find some very strong Jewish urban communities in, for instance, New York but also in some other cities. Jews making a major cultural, economic, and political contribution. And today, up to about 6 million people who call themselves Jews live in the United States. Another major movement of people were the Huguenots. They originated in France, and large numbers of Huguenots left France after the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. That, some 50 years earlier, had granted Protestants a certain amount of freedom, but that edict was renounced, revocated, and so large numbers of Protestants, Huguenots from France, went elsewhere. Large numbers settled in the Dutch Republic. Significant communities formed in England, in Germany, in Brandenburg, Prussia in particular, and also to Switzerland and overseas to South Africa and even in North America. So the Huguenots, they were a significant stream of people going from one place to another. When we're thinking about the spread of groups of people, in particular promoting a particular religion, we think of Islam, the 20th century, demographic growth, spread of large groups of Muslims, often seeking work in other countries and causing a lot of concern on the part of the original population in many cases, also because of the high birth rates in those areas which have a Muslim majority. And by the way, it seems that the high birth rates, even among Muslims, are in many places a thing of the past. And there is even concern that in some Muslim countries, that there are not enough children being born in order to retain their large majority. There has been this migration of Muslims to Europe, North America, and growth of these Muslim communities in various places with mosques and schools and Islamic organizations, etc., etc. Because of the wealth of some of the Muslim countries in the Middle East, there has been a lot of money flowing from the Middle East to Islamic communities elsewhere in the world, and they have been able to help these Islamic communities to build mosques and to promote their religion and build schools, etc., etc. When we look at the percentage now of people who have come from Islamic countries, and so Islamic people come to the Western world, the percentages are not as high as actually many people think they are. There is often this idea that they soon will be a majority, well, maybe in some cities, maybe in some areas, but by and large, the numbers are still quite limited. In the United States, 1.3% of all people belong to the Islam. In other countries in the West, it's a little higher. Australia is about the same, but Canada is quite a bit higher. In the Netherlands, about 5 to 6% belongs to Islam, and in England, a little higher. But still, these are not the horrendous figures that many people are talking about. And it should be said that among Islamic people in many of these countries, the birth rates are not as high as they used to be. But anyway, large numbers of people have moved from Islamic countries to countries that were originally mainly Christian. 20th century has seen a lot of migration. After the Second World War, large numbers of people migrated from Europe, trying to find a better life, in particular in Canada and the United States, Australia, New Zealand. And you see some of these arrows on this map showing where people went. Now, in my own family, two of my sisters migrated to Canada. My oldest sister, her husband was the son of a farmer, didn't see any prospect in the Netherlands, not enough farming land, too many people to want to start farming, and so Canada was the solution. Large numbers of people left and went to Canada and the United States, and that was true for many other European countries as well. Now, when we talk about migrants, let's move to refugees, asylum seekers, but refugees in particular. We think sometimes that the largest number of refugees are in our own country because we talk about them a lot, but actually the largest number, the country with the largest number of refugees is Turkey. There are some 3.6, 3.7 million refugees, mainly from Syria, that have found refuge, yes, in Turkey. Colombia has a large number of refugees. Germany, mostly from Ukraine, but still about 2 million. The German chancellor, she said, "Wir schaffen das." They are welcome, let them come. They have come to Germany, but also Uganda, with lots of refugees accepted from South Sudan and the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then Bangladesh is another example where large numbers of refugees have come, in particular from Myanmar, the Rohingya. On this map, you see where the internally displaced persons are mostly situated. And then you see that is in particular in a large part of East Africa, with the conflicts that have been there as the cause for these being internally displaced. The Middle East also, and some parts of Asia. Well, that's something of the historical background in the past. When we say that this is a present problem, and in the politics of today's world, it plays a major role, all these people that come to our countries, and what can we do to protect our borders better and to make sure that not enough people are coming in. It's actually something that figures very largely in Dutch politics. Last week, a new government has started, and one of their main goals is to bring the number of asylum seekers and refugees, to bring that down drastically. And that is something that, as Christians, we, I think, need to worry about. Sure, some of these arguments are correct. We have to watch out who comes in. We cannot allow everybody to come in and become a citizen of our country. But in particular, if we think of politics from a Christian perspective, then we have to remember some of the things in particular that the Bible tells us about how to deal with foreigners, how to deal with people who have been forced to flee because of conflicts or hunger or for whatever reason. Think about these texts, for instance. Exodus 22, verse 21. Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt. It's interesting that people who have a background in a foreign country, 1 or 2 generations later, have forgotten that their parents, grandparents were foreigners. But that was true also for the people in Israel, that they soon forgot that they had been foreigners in another country. Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourselves, for you were foreigners in Egypt. It does not say tolerate them if you have to, but it says love them as yourselves. Now, we all realize that historical circumstances change, and we must look at the context, but yet we cannot forget these passages. They are part of the Bible, and they tell us something very significantly about how to deal with people who have come to live among us. The Old Testament is adamant. Israel must remember that they were strangers in Egypt, and that should be the basis for empathy. They must realize that God identified with and wanted protection for the foreigner, equal justice for the indigenous, the native people, and the foreigners, equal treatment in the Torah, in the law. Legal protection for foreigners, they're often mentioned alongside widows and orphans. We find that there were certain economic provisions for people who had come to live among the Israelites. There was this custom of being able to glean, to find wheat, food, after the main harvest had taken place. In the commandment of Sabbath rest, there is mention of the foreigners, mention of those who have come from elsewhere, but still they should also be able to profit from the Sabbath rest. And there is the tithe for the poor, and that includes, in many cases, the foreigner. So as I said, there is this command, this instruction, not only to tolerate, but even to love the stranger. Now, admittedly, that's not always easy when people have very different customs and very sometimes are not always pleasant in the way we find live and the demands they may sometimes make, but still, this is the basic rule, not just to tolerate, but also to love the foreigner, the stranger. For Israel, it was a test of covenant faithfulness that they would treat the strangers in their midst in a humane and good way. And we find that in the prophetic vision, the foreigners are often included in God's future people. What we find in the Old Testament is repeated also in the New Testament. Matthew 25, this famous chapter about how Christ looks at people who actually belong to him. Those are the people who have not only said that they were his followers, but who actually acted as his followers. And he says, well, I was a stranger and you invited me. That is one of the criteria whether you are acceptable to me or not. Hebrews 13, verse 2. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. For by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. And of course, there is that famous parable where the Samaritan, rather than the priest or the Levite, the Samaritan is the one who is actually following the example of Christ and who takes pity on his neighbor, even though he does not belong to the same ethnic group. Migrants and refugees, that's an important point to make, have often played an important role as missionaries in bringing the gospel to other people in other places in the world. After they were persecuted in one place, they would go and testify of their faith in other places. And sometimes these were not the Orthodox Christians only, but also dissident movements who played an important role in disseminating the gospel. In particular, the Nestorians, for instance, they were a very major dissident movement in early Christianity, but they did much to spread the gospel over a considerable area. In the time of the colonization, there is lots of bad things that we can say about that period of colonization. And many of us who live in Europe need to be ashamed of the way our countries went about in their colonies. And the Dutch have certainly a lot to apologize for the way they acted in the East Indies, what is now Indonesia, etc. But at the same time, colonization also, and that should also be recognized, has played a major role in bringing Christianity, maybe not always in a pure form, but bringing Christianity to other people. Today, there are many diaspora communities, people who have come from particular major Christian countries to other places where they have formed a community which has a very positive influence in the country where they have settled. Now you see right in the right bottom a name, Bijlmer. That's a Dutch name. A major part of Amsterdam, probably about 15% of the city, is in the region called Bijlmer. This was built in the 1950s, 1960s, early 1970s. And the authorities in Amsterdam then decided that they did not need to reserve any place for churches, because in the future, the Dutch would no longer go to church. That was their vision. Today, this is the most religious part of Amsterdam, because this is where a few 100,000 people who have come from elsewhere have settled. But they have no church buildings, because there was made no provision to have these buildings. But yet, it is an illustration how people who have come from elsewhere have changed sometimes the religious picture of a society. And we see, of course, now that where once people from Europe and the United States went to evangelize other regions in the world, now often people from those regions come to us in our countries and to help us to evangelize our postmodern society. So migrants, refugees, and much more could be said, they have played and are playing a major role in the development of the Christian world at present. Okay, let's say a few things about the Seventh-day Adventist Church. You have heard it say, it's been published in our journals, that the Pew Research Center concluded that there is no major Christian denomination in North America that reflects a greater ethnic and cultural diversity than the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So we are, they say, the most ethnically and culturally diverse church that exists in North America. But it's not only in America that the church is diverse. And in Europe, there are several countries where the indigenous membership is in the minority because of the large numbers of members, brothers and sisters, who have come from elsewhere. That is certainly true of the United Kingdom and France, where people have come from former colonies. It's true in Spain, where people have come mostly from other European countries. The Netherlands, about 60% of all members are members who have come from elsewhere in recent decades. Same picture in Belgium, maybe even more so. And I'm not totally sure what the figures are for Germany, but there have also been large influxes of people coming from elsewhere. German Russians, Romanians, and Africans, etc. When we look at North America, then according to figures released by the Office of David Trim, the Office of Statistics of the General Conference, 35%, just over 35% of all American Adventists are white. About 30% are Black Americans. And then you have a large percentage of Hispanics. Asians are a significant percentage. And then a number of people coming from elsewhere as well. So that is a very diverse picture of the church in North America. It's even more maybe diverse, although you might say it's no longer diverse because it has just changed. But in the UK, in England, England, Scotland, etc., the UK, United Kingdom, over 70% is of Afro-Caribbean or now also African background. Large numbers came originally from the British colonies in the Caribbean, but in the last 25, 30 years also large numbers have come from particular African countries, for instance, Zimbabwe. 70% of all members in the United Kingdom are Black Americans or Afro-Caribbean people. Other ethnic groups, about 20. And then there is just over 10% of the British church is what you might call white British or European. So that has radically changed the composition of the church in Great Britain. And the same is true for France. The people who've come from the Caribbean or from Africa, it's over 50%. And then there is a large number of other immigrants. And so European, French, let's say the indigenous membership is about 30%. 1 in 3 is actually European, French in origin. So migration has really changed the face of the church in Europe. Also in Australia. It's in Australia, Adventism is also one of the most ethnically diverse, with a strong representation coming from the Pacific Islands, also from some African countries, Asian countries, and of course also European countries, for instance, the Balkans. And so many congregations in Australia are multicultural, multilingual, and that increased diversity is continuing. It's increasing. I could give some further pictures of other countries, but it's important also to mention that within particular groups have spread around, like you had a Jewish diaspora. You see, for instance, the Romanian diaspora in our church. Now, it's always an interesting question why the Romanians have been the most successful in Europe as far as building a large church. There were at one point in time well over 120,000 Romanian Seventh-day Adventists, many more than in any other country. But today there are, I think, about 70 or 80,000. Where are the others? They live in many other countries in Europe, in groups. They have Romanian churches. For instance, in Spain, there are more Spanish Adventists with a Romanian than with a Spanish background. Ghanaians, they have formed churches in many of the European countries. In Amsterdam, we have a church of at least 200, 250 Ghanaian church members. Very, very vibrant church. And there is now an increased number of Portuguese-speaking, Spanish-speaking churches all over Europe. So there is a constant movement, and that movement has not stopped. If anything, that movement is increasing. What do we do with this particular phenomenon? The movement of people going from place to place. We know that, politically speaking, there are different options. Some people say restrict further migration. It is posing too many problems. And we don't have enough work for them. We don't have enough houses for them. They take too much of our health care system. So let's restrict further migration. That is, unfortunately, I think, that's my personal opinion, the case in many European countries, including the country where I live. Because this has some extreme forms where people say, well, we don't want people who look different from what we are. You find that white nationalism, who are afraid that there is a kind of replacement, that there is some kind of plan to make sure that all of us white people are replaced by people who come from elsewhere. Germans call that Umvolkung. And so there are people on the extreme side of the political spectrum who say we must make sure that that does not happen, that the original population in the Western world should reclaim its what they call its original rights. But fortunately, there are also other policies, in some countries at least, for people who are in need, who seek asylum, and who say, let's accept them, have good rules, let's accept them as is needed. And I feel personally very strongly that for a Christian, we must have the idea that, yes, there are laws are necessary, rules are necessary, but let's be generous, because that is what the Christian principles tell us. That's what the Bible tells us. Welcoming the foreigner who needs help, and do that at all levels. Now, we must realize, I think, and that's what I have tried to say, that immigration, having refugees and asylum seekers, is nothing new. People have always moved around through history. And the reasons have basically always been the same. Persecution was often a major factor, but also wars and other conflicts and plagues, droughts, economical survival. People have moved in groups and individually, and that is still happening. And let's realize we cannot stop this. It will continue. But we, as Christians at least, can exert what little influence we sometimes have, that we act Christianly. For Seventh-day Adventists, and you may want to discuss that a little bit in the coming half hour or so. Diversity, yes, we are the most diverse church in many countries, but I'm not a prophet. I can only tell you that diversity will increase further. And diversity can and often will bring controversy. It's not easy sometimes to live together, to work together as people coming from different cultures with different ideas, different prejudices. It often will bring controversy. That's a fact of life. But I also strongly believe that if managed properly, if leaders work concertedly in a certain way, that diversity can bring enrichment. It can bring new vitality. And let's face it, for instance, in Britain, Seventh-day Adventism would have ceased to exist virtually in most places had it not been for the people who have come from elsewhere. In London, Greater London, are a few thousand Seventh-day Adventists, but there are maybe 100 Adventists who look somewhat similar to Lawrence Siebold and myself. So the church would cease to exist in certain areas, certainly in Europe, were it not for the fact that people have come from elsewhere and they have brought a new vitality. That means at the same time that we need strategies to reach the different ethnic segments that we have not reached. Now, when I think of the different ethnic segments in my country, I'm thinking of the people who've come from Suriname, the people who've come from Indonesia, the people who've come from the Caribbean, etc. But there are many other different ethnic groups that we actually have never worked for. There are in the Netherlands over 100,000 people who come from China. To my knowledge, we have never tried to do anything for the Chinese group that live among us in the Netherlands. There is need to work for different ethnic groups in a very specific way. We need to really think through how we can possibly reach different ethnic groups that we have not reached so far. One of the things that is important is to provide adequate pastoral support for those new groups that have come to live amongst us. They have special needs. They have questions that need to be answered. They need to be supported in some of the things they want to do. And there need to be a new focus on work for the indigenous population. Now, when I look, for instance, at the journal that is put out for Dutch Adventists, and I look at the pages in the back, I find a page where I have pictures and stories of people who have died. And when I look at those, most of these pictures show white people. They are dying. The graying of the church. When I look at the pages with all the baptisms, I see, fortunately, quite a few baptisms, but they are mostly of a different kind of ethnic background than different from the original population. And that's clear. That's a message where the church is going. A particular segment is disappearing, and the growth of the church finds place among those that have more recently come and joined our church. So let's welcome them, let's support them, but at the same time, let us together also find new ways of working for the indigenous population, because they now need perhaps more focus even than some of these other groups that I have been talking about. So, and then as we start our discussion, let us remember refugees, asylum seekers. At one time, Jesus was among the refugees. Joseph and Mary, who had to flee, went to Egypt, where they stayed probably a couple of years. So, well, I think that's where I want to leave it for my introduction. It is something, people moving, not something new. It has always taken place, but it has a special significance in our day and age, where it has such a political significance, where we as Christians can make a difference and tell others that we need to look at the biblical norms and remember that even Christ was a refugee. So, thank you, Lauren, and I think I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, Linda, are you still here? Where are you? Linda's going to take over here. Well, while Linda gets back
Yes,
to her
I'm
computer.
sorry. I
There you
apologize.
go. Okay.
I hit the wrong button and did something instead of unmuting. Dr. I'm going to take over and handle the moderation here. I apologize for my misstep there. And I know we have several lined up in the queue, but when you get to be the moderator, you get to ask your own questions when you want. And so I'm going to start. I have a question for you. And it's not meant to be a trick question. I really am very sincere about this, because I love the text that you had in Exodus and the remonstration that was given to the children of Israel about how they were to treat foreigners and strangers, and how they were to care for them and love them. And they got the benefit of the Sabbath and all those things. And yet I look at what Ezra did to all of the women who were foreign wives of the children of Israel back when he got there and began his crusade, and how they just simply put all those women and their children, they just put them out.
Mm-hmm.
And so was God's recommendation that children of Israel be good to the foreigners? did it mean something, but only up to a certain point, meaning something short of marriage? And if so, why? And did Ezra make a mistake? I mean, putting all these women and children out, presumably to, the horrors of the wilderness and ultimate death. I mean, how do you reconcile those two things?
Well, you said you were not going to ask a trick question.
No, it's a very sincere question, I promise you.
No, it's a very fair question, and but it's also a question to which I do not have a satisfactory answer. And I find other such things that I cannot reconcile. When it comes that we should not kill people and we should be always striving for peace, yet some of the Old Testament stories give a different kind of connotation. And when you see what happened when Israel was about to conquer Canaan, some of the things that took place, I find that also very hard to reconcile with basic biblical teachings. And so what happened in the days of Ezra, some people would say it was a unique situation. It really was the spiritual survival of the people being at stake. And some people would say that is something that we face today with the influx of people from Islam and other religions. Some people might find that an encouragement to be a little tougher than they would otherwise be. But frankly, Linda, I don't really I don't find it easy to reconcile these things. And I thought it was heartless what you read in Ezra. But it's a while since I have read the story. I also think that it was not fully implemented after all.
Or could we even make room for the proposition that perhaps it was a mistake on his part to consider such a thing?
Yeah, yeah. I would be ready to do that, but
Okay.
for some, the way they look at inspiration of the Bible, it would be difficult to accept that.
I
But
understand.
but I find that in the end we should interpret the Old Testament at the against the background of the Sermon on the Mount.
Indeed. Thank you. That's a perfect response here. I appreciate it. Well, we're going to start to pick up. We have a couple of folks who've raised their hands. I know that Lauren has given everybody instructions on how to do that electronically, or let us know in the chat if you have any trouble with it. Let's remember to keep your questions or your observations relatively brief so that we can make sure that anyone who wants to comment can do so. And so, Bjorn, it appears you've taken a break from your housekeeping tasks, and bless you, by the way, for that. So what are you thinking about this topic? What is your question for Dr. Bruinsma?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the spot here. Great presentation. And I just in terms of the headlines right now and what we just talked about in the previous question, this is my question. Do you feel, Reinder, that the Old Testament in general results in basically Israeli foreign policy if you have a modern day interpretation, that way of dealing with the other and your neighbor?
Say that again, Björn.
Well, do you feel that if you have the Old Testament sort of as a standalone, does that in modern day interpretation, does that basically result in Israeli foreign policy towards neighbors and the other, like that? That kind of very sort of sharp elbowed, very aggressive sort of approach, because they have not had that balancing effect you just talked about.
No. Well, we realize that even today there are all kinds of things taking place in the Middle East, and that makes it, it makes it difficult to say things that everybody will agree with. But the way at present the Israeli government is dealing with its neighbors, it probably has indeed Old Testament roots. The idea that God promised the country from the sea to the sea, etc. And we all realize that the people of Israel have gone through a terrible time, in particular, well, through the centuries, but in particular, of course, in the 1930s, 40s in Europe, the Holocaust. For me, that makes it so difficult to understand that people who have suffered so much are willing to put so much suffering on other people.
Mm.
And on the other hand, you can see that when people feel threatened, personally or as a people, they would do certain things that they would not do were the threat not so existential. So I'm willing to have some understanding also for the fact that if you as a nation are so threatened that you would come to drastic measures to defend yourself. And I have some understanding for the fact that in some of the countries where we live, and that is true also for some of the European countries, that we say, well, we have to protect some of the things that we have. And we cannot afford to just open our borders and let everybody in and just share whatever we have with whoever wants to come and wants to have a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I have some sympathy for that particular fact. But at the same time, I think that needs to be balanced. That there are these Old Testament texts, yes, but also, I just mentioned it, there is the Sermon on the Mount. There is the example of Christ. There is the fact that Matthew 25 tells us that in last resource, the question whether we will be admitted to the kingdom is not whether we have a firm understanding of the investigative judgment.
What?
If you still remember that term, yes. But the final criteria is, have we met that person in prison? Have we met that person who was suffering injustice? Have we met also the stranger in our midst? So for me, as a Christian, that means a challenge. It's not always easy to love the stranger in the midst. I don't like these people, to see these people in these the women whose faces are totally covered, and what is it, the niqabs, whatever you call it, and there are some things, that happen. It's Ramadan at the moment. There are many things I really don't feel attracted to. So it's a challenge personally, yes, to respect and love the stranger in our midst. But if there is something like Christian politics, that is then also a challenge for Christians who make politics or who vote and have a voice, to also make sure that there is this generosity towards the other that I feel the New Testament requires of us, that becomes part of how we deal with others. Now
Very balanced.
that almost became a sermon, and I wonder, have I answered to your question?
Yes, in a very nuanced way. Thank you.
Okay.
But you know, adding to Bjorn's question, I mean, the first question that I wrote down, and I interjected here because of Bjorn's question, is that you talked about it was a very enlightening historical chronology of displaced people who become the strangers. And we look at these various diasporas. And, you know, today there are, I don't know if everybody knows this. I only happen to know it because I looked it up in relation to a Sabbath school class I had to teach not too long ago. But there are actually fewer Jews in the world today than there are Seventh-day Adventists. So not you, you're nodding your head. You must have known that. That was a shock to me. I had no idea. There's only about 15 or 16 million Jews in the world today. And there are, what do we say, 20 to 23 Seventh-day Adventists somewhere around the world. But my question, just to add to Bjorn's, is when we look at these various diasporas of the Huguenots, some of the Muslims, some of the others, what is it? I know this is a subjective question, but where does the intensity associated with anti-Semitism come from? I mean, for a relatively small group, Dr. Bruinsma, why, in your estimate, is there such animosity toward the Jews as we look at their various diaspora movings around the world historically?
Well, there's probably in the audience that we have people who know more about it than I do. But let me try to say something about this. And by the way, yes, there are more Seventh-day Adventists than there are Jews in this world. And that's true of another world religion as well. There are about as many Seventh-day Adventists as there are Sikhs in the world. And so there are actually some Adventist missiologists who feel that we should not refer to ourselves so much as a denomination, but we should count ourselves as a world religion. If Jews and Sikhs are mentioned among the world religions spread out over the world in many ways, but with the membership of maybe 15 or 25 million, then we should maybe think along the same lines and put ourselves in a special class. Now, I don't believe in that, but there's some who feel that that would be a way to go. But anti-Semitism, it has such deep roots. We sense some of it already in the New Testament. The struggle that the apostles had, and Paul in particular, to make sure that Jews and non-Jews would be part of one church and feel that they could be different and yet be one. The Jews, who were often accused by the Christians for all kinds of strange things, and the Christians were accused by the Jews. In Christians who for centuries tried to make sure that they would not be regarded as Jews, but that they were different. Jews who, well, in the diaspora became important often as professionals, as people, as great artists, a lot of jealousy. People who often were the ones who were financing the princes of the various European countries and the popes. The Jews who were so influential, often also even in American politics, other places. There are all kinds of historical factors that did apparently arose the jealousy of people. It's a very complex kind of history, but yeah, that today there is this upcoming strengthening of anti-Semitism that maybe now has to do quite a bit with the way in which Israel is dealing with the Palestinian people.
Mhm.
That I don't think that helps their status, their moral status in the world. And it's difficult for many people to be let's say, not to be anti-Semitist and yet be anti the policies of the current Israeli government. But yeah.
No, I understand what you're saying. My own personal view is one can be anti-Zionist without being anti-Semitic.
Right.
They forgot somehow that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was to be a ceiling, not a floor, in terms of retribution.
Yeah.
But I thank you again for your historical perspective on that. Linda, join the conversation, please.
Thank you, Linda. I really enjoyed that, Doctor. Thank you. I want your thoughts on here in America, what's going on currently, because I live here in America. Shooting two people in the streets, two American citizen, and almost killing another one in Minnesota. I watched that movie more than one time, The Hiding Place. You may be familiar with it, Corrie ten Boom, a Dutch family, where they had a secret room where they hid the Jewish people. I'm beginning to feel that way about the immigrants, the way they're using deceptive tactics. They're even allowed to go into the homes without a warrant and snatch people. Do you think that it might be helpful for Christians and maybe other people to have secret places like the Ten Boom family and others did in Dutch to hide the immigrant families where they took care of them, and everything, but they were hidden for at least the next 3 years until maybe this administration is going on. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Living on the other side of the pond, I find it very difficult to comment too much on situations in the United States. I am not a admirer of a person called Donald Trump, but I have found that when I talk to many of my brothers and sisters in the United States, I have to be very careful in what I say, because some will agree with me and say, well, we hope that this nightmare is soon over. And others say, well, look, he may not be a perfect person, but he's doing a lot of good things. So it is difficult for me and to say too much about the American situation. But of course, I follow it very keenly. I have lived a number of years in the States, and I have lots of contacts with people in the States. I watch CNN almost daily. Now, some would say maybe you should also watch Fox, but then I must say we don't have that on our list of programs that we can. I cannot get that on our TV, fortunately, maybe. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that I think I stay relatively well informed about what is happening in the United States. And I just wonder how it is possible that such a phenomenon as how ICE operates is how that can happen in a country with the kind of background that it has. And yes, I can understand if there are individuals or even institutions that would try to help those who are in danger of being picked up or of course, some people need to be picked up. There are people who shouldn't be in the country. There are people who should be deported. That's true in the United States. That's true here. But when you get a situation that has evolved the way it has at present, in some places also in Europe, and certainly in the United States, then it becomes our Christian duty to make an assessment and say, is this a situation where I need to obey the government, or is this a situation where I need to be a Christian first and help and maybe even hide persons? Now, there is currently in a church building in the Netherlands a church service going on that has been going on, I think, for about 6 months now. And that service is continuous, is not interrupted at all. And 24 hours, 7 days a week, the service continues. A lot of people come and help with preaching and Bible reading, etc., to keep the service going, because as long as the service goes, the police is not able to deport some people who are hiding in the church. Now, that may be extreme, but on the other hand, I think that is a symbol of maybe Christians should work if they feel there is a situation that is absolutely unjust. It's people that should not be deported, that should not be taken away, that we come and try to come to their rescue.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bruinsma. And thank you, Linda, for your question. Lauren, I know you know how to unmute yourself. So
Yeah.
your thoughts to the table.
Yeah, this has been interesting. Back to the thing about Israel. It shouldn't be much of a surprise anymore that people tend to repeat to others the cruelty that they've received. People who are treated cruelly often treat cruelly in return, I think. But that's not what I want to talk about. I'm going to lay a heavier thing on you, Reinder, and I don't ask you to answer it, but I think we need to talk about it sometime. As more and more people have come, I mean, I grew up in a monoculture. I grew up in North Dakota. Everybody was white. Everybody was a farmer. Everybody was a German farmer, as a matter of fact. We were all the same. There was very little diversity. Suddenly I become a pastor and I find myself in places like California, and surprisingly, Ohio has presented more diversity than California did.
Mm.
It's a major spot for people from Ethiopia and Somalia to immigrate, and Africans. Biggest church in town, the most successful church in town is a Ghanaian church. You mentioned the Ghanaians. When I first came here, I had one of the Korean churches that wanted to rent my church. I became very interested in that interesting junction between faith and culture, between religion and culture. Interestingly, all of these groups that I'm talking about here, they are the ones I know here in America, even though they're from countries where people dress in all kinds of different ways. All the pastors and most of the people in the pews stand up with wool suits and white shirts and neckties. uh, the it's very difficult to find just where that line is, and even within our community, we have that struggle. People will say, nowadays in the United States, Western countries generally, women should be treated equally to men, and then people from the General Conference will turn around and say, yeah, except when it comes to ministers, because in the Bible, women were not allowed to be ministers. They were not allowed to speak. And so we keep running into this just clash of culture and faith. I'll just tell you one more short story. One of my friends who writes for me from Africa told me about showing up at church one day when it was 100 and some degrees and humid, and he wore his best dressy African print shirt, and they sent him home to put on a jacket and a white tie and a white shirt and a tie. So we're constantly struggling with this. Part of me could say my faith could be boiled down to nothing more than do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I probably could be fairly happy with that. And God is out there and we're going to live again, sometime, someplace. That would be without any of the attached cultures, but a lot of it has been attached to a lot of other things have been attached to that faith by Hebrew people, Jewish people, Greeks, New Testament Jews, New Testament Greeks, Gentiles, and then add on to that the Roman Catholic Church, and then add on to that Protestantism, and here we are. And we sit with all this and we say, this is what God wants from us. And I'm not sure we really know anymore. I'm not sure we can really pull apart culture and faith any longer. It is so completely entwined. This seems to me a really important thing to talk about because it keeps coming up over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Of course, some of these things, Lauren, that we see as culture in groups that have come to live amongst us are actually things that we taught them in the first place when we were first in contact with these people. Now, I lived in West Africa for a number of years, and yes, I had to wear a black jacket and a black tie on Sabbath, keep my jacket on, even if it was boiling hot. But missionaries who had come from Europe and from the US had told them when they first started the church that that was the way in which you need to worship. And so we taught them something, and it's very confusing for them that then there are other people who are of our culture who come and say, from our world, who say, well, that what a former generation told you is no longer valid. So
That's
it's
right.
different now.
We've moved on, and so you should too.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to having these diasporas amongst us, we see that once you have let's say in Europe, take an example, the Romanian diaspora. I think it's correct to say that where you have a Romanian church, take for instance Brussels, you have a couple of Romanian churches, one very major Romanian church, quite conservative.
Mm-hmm.
But they have their own worship service. They have their own, they use their own language. They have their own history, their own memories. And so they stay with what they have. And it's very difficult for them to accept that others do it differently, even though in their home country things are changing. And so now we have often said, well, maybe we should not allow Romanian pastors, Romanian leaders to come and preach in our Romanian churches because, for one thing, they may want to keep an offering, have an offering, and they will take money away, take that to their own country. But maybe that has been a wrong approach, and we should make sure that there is more influence, more awareness of what is happening at the home front so that the people in the diaspora can also move along gradually in a
Right.
better way. I think there are some things that we could think of that may help us. Another thing that comes to mind is that when we are thinking of the distinction between a bit more liberal and a bit more conservative, to use those terrible words, it's not like that all those who have come from elsewhere are the conservatives, and all those who are indigenous, they are the more progressives and are hindered in their progressiveness. It's very mixed.
That's right.
And you have, in particular, also among young people, they're not so progressive, maybe less
That's
so
right.
than they used to be. And let's face it, they also listen in many of the groups, not only the indigenous European white groups, etc., but also in the other groups, they also listened to the Doug Batchelors and the Walter Weitz. And there is an influence that goes through the different ethnic groups. So it is actually quite a complex problem. And
Yes.
well, you expect me to have answers to all these problems, but I'm sorry,
I
Lauren.
don't actually.
That's all
I,
right.
don't-
You're making a
I,
good you're making a good stab at it, Reinder.
yeah,
Yes, thank you
I
for
don't
that.
expect you to answer that one. I think it's something that we do need to keep talking about, though. Thanks
Yeah.
so much.
Yes, for sure. Let me come to Florin. Welcome. What are your thoughts today?
Yes, I have a comment and a question as well. So here I am a Romanian. We just talk about them.
I saw your name there. I thought, okay, I better be careful now. I think
Thank
we
you.
met once. We met once in Romania, didn't we?
Probably. Um, was a very large and deep presentation, and some of the things I had planned to say were covered by Lauren. However, he is a Native American, actually American, where I am an immigrant living in America. So we'll give you a little bit of the opposite view. I grew up there as a third generation. Actually, I was born in Romania as a third generation, and after moving around the Europe for maybe few years, about more than 30 years ago, I came to the United States. And only after spending few decades here, I realized a different reason that you're not listing into the reasons people are moving around. And other than political or economical reason. Me coming into the United States and living here generated an enlarged worldview that it was necessary. So culture, it's a personal culture moral and spiritual development that I received as a result of moving here. If I would be in Romania at this present time, I will never attend this group presentation and discussions because I don't have that view, that worldview to come here, and also I will not have the exposure to the different view of Adventism. As a pastor working here in North America division, I was expected to be efficient, and I was suggested by the church administration always to work with the very conservative churches because I'm coming from a conservative background that worked well for the first 10 years. But then something happened. I was not anymore comfortable working with the conservative churches, actually ultra conservative or very conservative churches, because something changed. So we have, on another hand, the Romanian Adventist Church, that it's still those who decided to stay there and never abandon, like we were labeled, you abandoned your tradition, you left to see something else. They are very reluctant of bringing back their pastors who decided, who went outside to receive graduate studies and to come back to Romania because they were afraid that they will bring an alterate Adventism back to their country, and they need to keep up the good level, good quality of Adventism. So from this point of view, I'm trying to phrase the question for you. So I see the fact that culturally speaking, the church is enriched by people coming from different cultures, but there are side effects of this multicultural realm, and that will affect the real growth of Adventism movement. And I can give a single example of side effect that was noticed to the church. Every effort made by the Western world to move a little bit farther, for example, women ordination or others, were stopped, was held ground by the people from different cultures. So, percentual speaking, those who grew up and were participating into world church, they were able to control what the Western world changing over the time was able to go. So the question, how do you reconcile the church growth? We know that that this was a mission. We are mission oriented to go everywhere around the world, in every corner. How do you reconcile this mission of the church and the spiritual moral development of Adventism? Because as long as we we have a huge majority of the new Adventists around of the mission, the quality of the church will stay low. So how do you reconcile these two aspects, the mission of the church and the growth, the moral and spiritual growth of the church? Thank you.
Well, Hans Gutierrez in Italy, some of you may know that name, just wrote a very interesting book, Small Adventism, and pleads for the fact that we should look for an Adventism that does not primarily define itself in quantities, but defines itself in quality. And unfortunately, we have often defined success primarily in terms of growth in numbers rather than greater depth spiritually. And that is something that I think the church needs to address globally, but it's something that we need to address also in particular on the local level. Much, I think, depends, however, on the kind of leadership that we have. Now, you mentioned the issue of women's ordination. And surely the fact that there were large segments of members with a very literal approach to the Bible who said, no, the Bible says we cannot have women in ministry. That certainly was an important factor. But if the top administrator of our church had been courageous and had moved the church forward, then I think 20 years ago we would have had a situation where at least per region of the world, it could have been decided whether or not to ordain women. Now, I'm not pleading for a kind of leadership that is autocratic and that decides what can be done by himself, herself. But I am looking and hoping for the kind of leadership that does not only look at how many people would applaud me when I go this way or that way, but have the courage to say, well, I believe people, this is the way we ought to go. This is the implication of the gospel. And so I want to push for that. And I believe if we had had that type of leadership, that the issue of women ordination would have been solved some time ago. And I hope that before too long, we will actually move in the right direction. But yeah, we are a church that looks in particular at quantity. We are happy when we baptize 1,000 people, when we baptize 3,000 people. And the small success of one or two people, we often being converted, we often ignore and find not important enough to report. Yeah, what can we do? And I realized that what you're painting, your own journey, you felt comfortable in a more conservative church, and then there comes a point where you're not feeling so comfortable anymore. Well, I think most of us, we have gone through a certain development in our own personal and our professional life. I started out as a fundamentalist. Most people in my country around me, young pastors, we were very fundamentalist, even going to Newbold in the 1960s at that time. That was a very fundamentalist approach to the Bible. For me, that changed when I, in the mid-1960s, went to Andrews. And in particular, were sitting in the classes of Sake Kubo. And he gave me a book to read. He said, you read that book about fundamentalism. That changed my view very drastically. And gradually, when I think of some of the things that I preached 40 years ago, some of the things that I wrote even 25 years ago, I realize I have developed. Maybe I've also picked up some wrong ideas somewhere along, development is never totally perfect. But I think you can only be happy that you went through that development as well. But we can maybe do more for some of these conservative churches, for some of these Romanian churches in the diaspora, for some of these Ghanaian churches in the diaspora, these German Russian churches. We need maybe more of a strategy to help them move forward and maybe hinder as much as we can, or at least give an answer to some of these influences that some of these churches undergo.
Thank you, Dr. Bruinsma, for your wisdom. I appreciate that, your response.
Well, I don't know whether there's much wisdom,
Well,
but
here's the bad news about having a really good presentation, Dr. Bruinsma, is you get a lot of really provocative questions. So that's what you're getting today. So Vince, welcome to you. What are you thinking today?
Well, I would like to tap into that wisdom as well. And I'll just sort of lay the groundwork for where I'm coming from. Over the last month or so, I've been reading in the Old Testament where God is leading Israel from Egypt and they get to the promised land and so forth, the delays. And they go to the first place and they do it just like God said. The walls fall down, they do little work. Then a week or whatever it is later, they send their own men and it's a terrible debacle. And then you realize that they're to cleanse the land. And when you read about the extent of it, it's pretty scorched earth. They're not even to have any cattle left there and so forth. And I understand that if God had if they had followed him perfectly, it would have been a lot cleaner than what we read. But I'm still wondering sort of what your thoughts would be, because obviously even if the people fled and beyond the borders, they have relatives who aren't going to forget that for years and years. How do you think God, if things had worked out perfectly, where they had followed and did their right things, how much better or easier would it have been, or was this a detour that had to happen because of sin? Just your thoughts there, because it seems like a messy operation, clearing that country out, clearing everybody out, cattle, you name it. It was a pretty rough deal. So your thoughts there?
Well, one of the things that is often said is that these people who were living in Canaan, they were, of course, subject to a terrible kind of apostasy their religion was morally depraved. And so if Israel was going to have a chance of survival, they needed to deal with that quite radically. That is the answer, at least that I often hear when that is brought up. I tend to think that the way I read the Bible is that we have gradually developed in our understanding in the picture that we have of God. The picture that the people thousands of years ago in Israel had of God was more of a tribal lord and not really the kind of God that we recognize as the Father of Jesus Christ. That has gradually grown, and so some of these things that we read that they did because they felt that God was telling them to do so, well, I try to read them against that background and say that is not something that now determines how we should deal with other nations. And I was referring to the Sermon on the Mount. That is for me the basis of moral Christian behavior. And so I struggle with those Old Testament stories, but I think it has much to do with the kind of picture they still had of God in those days that was quite different. You know, it was more, we have this God and they have their gods, and these gods are struggling together and these are fighting together. While our Christian view is more, okay, we have God, the Father of Jesus Christ, and these other gods, they don't exist and they have no right. But it remains a difficult situation. And I always tell people, when you read the Old Testament, don't forget at the same time, for every chapter that you read in the Old Testament, read a couple of chapters in the New Testament.
Good advice. Thank you for that. Thank you, Vince, for your question. Eduardo, it's your turn. I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. I want to get the other two questioners in, so let's be succinct, if you will, please, sir.
Okay, thank you. Reinder, I'm thinking of Moses, especially on Exodus 33:60, that says, let me see if I can find it. It says, "For wherein now shall I be known that I have found grace in thy sight, and thy people? It is not that thou goest with us, so that we are separated, and thy people from all the people upon the face of the earth." And when you go to Exodus, I think 12, it says, "No uncircumcised, no stranger can participate of the Passover. Do not marry them." And then the book of Nehemiah, the last chapter, it said, you commit wrong. You marry the foreigners.
Mm-hmm.
And in the New Testament, when Peter has the vision, it says, don't call unclean what the Lord has cleansed.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to be part of God's people, you have to accept the teachings of God. You don't, when, I don't remember the text, but it says, if your prophet, your father, your mother, your son, your daughter, or your best friend tells you, come and worship a different God, you don't forgive him, you just kill him.
Mm-hmm.
So how we can discern? And I think the difference is like Ruth, your people is going to be my people, your God is going to be my God. In the New Testament, the strangers, they receive the Holy Spirit, they receive the Word of God, and they become part of.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any other reason to accept foreigners as one of us. Love the foreigner as yourself. No
Mm-hmm.
way. They have other gods, they have other customs. They serve Satan. We serve God. So can you kind of deal with this idea?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. If we have another couple of hours, we maybe can deal with that. But, I have not been suggesting that accepting others, loving others means just being okay with whatever they say and whatever they do. As Christians, we have certain principles, we have certain things we do, certain things we don't do. As Seventh-day Adventist, we follow certain principles. And it does not mean that in accepting other people, loving other people, that is saying whatever you do is okay for me. Ultimately, what we would like to see is that other people amongst us see that the Christian principles that we adhere to are to be preferred, are better than the principles that they have been following, although that is not true across the board. Of course, there are many good principles that other people have and things where we can learn. But to put it a bit more we would like to see ultimately that other people accept Jesus Christ and follow him. That is what our mission, our desire as Christians. But beyond that, people are welcome in our midst if certain conditions, in most cases, are met, certainly. But accepting others as fellow human beings and loving them as fellow human beings is not conditional on their acceptance of the Christian message or accepting our customs. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you, Reinder. Appreciate that. It's a hard question. Sir, I see you by your initials, and I should probably know who you are, and I apologize that I don't, but it's your turn. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is John Ney. Two very quick things. Earlier, Linda asked a question about whether or not it had become time to start being willing to hide people. And I just wanted to say, I thought you handled that very well. If such a time comes, it's probably not something any of us would dare discuss on a Zoom with over 100 people, just as it would be something during other times, whether it was World War II or Underground Railroad, one would keep it very quiet. I just wanted to mention or ask you, you used the word orderly, that you supported migration as long as it's handled in an orderly fashion. And I generally agree with your view and the way you handled it. I'm just wondering, as an example, Germany accepted, I think, 1 million Syrians who were fleeing. And I just wonder how you meant orderly, because to use that word sort of implies that maybe some are accepted and some are not. So could you explain a bit? Thank you.
Well, what I meant to say by saying orderly is, in the first place, that you cannot have an unlimited migration into your country. So you need to have some system that is well thought out, that is just, that is also working well as far as the bureaucracy is concerned, some system to determine who should be given a welcome to your country and who maybe should not be given a welcome because maybe of the kind of past that he or she had. You don't want criminals to come into your country. You may not want people with extreme ideas to come into your country, but you should have a system that is just and that works well in order to deal with refugees and asylum seekers. At present, and again, I give an example from my country, it takes about a year and a half for an asylum seeker to find out whether he can stay or not. That is not an orderly system. There should be ways to determine that, hopefully in weeks, if not in a few months, but not, a person should not be there 18 months before he or she may hear whether or not they can stay. So that's more or less what I meant, some of the things that I meant by orderly. You cannot just open the borders and say, well, everybody who wants to work and wants a better future, come. You do not put advertisements in the papers in Africa and say, well, you know, there is a country there where you're welcome, so please come. No, you need to have some kind of system. You need to have, well, you need to use your intellect also a little bit. But there must be a system that says that if you are in real need, if there are situations in your country where you are persecuted because of your religion, because of your sexual orientation, because of, well, whatever valid reason, then yes, we are willing, and hopefully together with other countries in the region, we are willing to let you come in and to hope that you can find a better future, a new future in our country.
Yes, thank you for that. And let me just add that, and Reinder said it, but I'll say it less politely. The orderliness is dependent upon the admitting country, and not on the shoulder of the immigrant. Okay, immigrants would like to enter in an orderly and proper way for the most part. And for example, the United States, where I live in Florida that thinks it's a border state, but we're not. But even those states that are do not have systems. There are not enough judges to hear cases. There are not ways sufficiently to be able to handle on any level, on any reasonable basis, the request for asylum. I mean, the young people that live next door to me, I have two young engineers, husband and wife, have two little kids who live next door to me. They're both employed. They pay taxes. They are Venezuelan, and they came here under asylum, which was granted in sort of a blanket way. But in terms of papers, they got nothing. And if ICE comes here, they're going to pick them up. And so they did everything they could do to provide the proper documentation, to provide the proper paperwork. And our system in this country is just not set up for it. But I did want to add, and George, before I come to you, I'm going to turn it to Lauren because he probably wants to talk about next week. But it's been very interesting, Reinder, you probably heard this in the news of late, that Spain, the country of Spain, determining that they had labor shortages, they have introduced a program to be able to increase and properly manage incoming immigrant people, and ways to be able to give them the assurance that they're going to have the ability to stay longitudinally if they handle things the right way. And it's not just, it's not just agricultural labor, it's all kinds of labor for which they need additional support. And their country has developed ways to handle it in an orderly way. So thank you for your response. Thank you for a good question. Gosh, these have been really good questions. So Lauren, what do you want to say about next week before I invite George?
This was a good discussion. Yeah, America has labor shortages and certainly will during the agricultural season. It's just that our government right now is in a state of chaos, which is, I think, intentional, but that's just how I see it. I think they want to keep it intentional. I'll tell you a funny story. An interview on TV, a guy went to one of these Trump rallies, and he interviewed this young couple, and he said, "So, what's your problem with immigration?" And they said, "Well, we're Christians, and we know that God does not want these people to come here." And he was kind of like, "Really?" He goes, he said, "So Jesus was an immigrant. What would you say if Jesus came to this country?" And without a second thought, this young lady said, "We would accept him, but only if he came legally." I thought that was very interesting. He'd have to, the guy kind of stood back and said, "What, Jesus, you would check to see whether Jesus came legally?" She said, "Absolutely. He would have to come legally." So there you go. Just so you know. Next week, we have Mark Carr coming, and this just seems to me like I've been waiting for somebody to teach on this for a long time. The question is, do churches, in the things that they do regularly, in our evangelism, in our prayers, in how we build up people's hopes, do we behave ethically in basic pastoral and congregational care? And I think this is really interesting. I have not heard anybody approach this before, and Mark's going to do that. Later on in the month, or the week after that, I have Brian Clausen coming in. I want you guys to notice this. This is Brian Clausen, who is an officer in Geoscience Research Institute. These guys have been hard to get a hold of. They do not come into places where there's questions that they might be asked. But Brian and I went to college together. I met him. He told me he was a big admirer of Adventist Today, which of course warmed my heart. And I said, "Okay, Brian, come and talk and visit with us, talk with us." So he's going to be coming the second week of March. Later on in the month, I have Jim Hayward coming, and he's going to be taking. This is going to be, I like this mix of things, and this is going to be Adventist history. He's going to take us through the history of George McCready Price, who came up a lot when I was a young pastor training. People say, "Well, George McCready Price says that the flood washed the fossils down in this particular way, and so that's why the trilobites are at the bottom and the mastodons are at the top, and this sort of thing." So it should be interesting. I don't know if he's going to get into more than the history, but just the history itself should be really interesting. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I hope you guys are too. And I guess, George Tichy, what did we do to get you to be the guy who makes the final comment in our class today? This should be interesting. Go for it, George.
Well, I'll give you one idea first. I think that if you guys could set a limit of, let's say, 2 minutes or 3 minutes max for every commenter, it will help us all to be more objective and straight to the point when we make comments. Because sometimes people tell the story of their life before they offer a question. And then there's a pressure at the end. There's not enough time. Just a suggestion. Reinder, when I can see something going on here between good and evil. When we see what's going on in Russia, and then in Hungary now, and Slovakia, and the worst now is America, and contrasting to what you said about the churches in decay, like in England, in many places. So the churches are losing they're not conquering, they're losing. Does it mean that evil is gaining, is winning, is prevailing? What hope can we have that good will actually be restored in some way? Or are we destined to have evil to win everywhere? What's happening in America is crazy, and much crazier is the fact that so many Christians, including a massive group of Adventists, supporting what's going on, supporting this fascism and this loss of institutions and everything. So is evil actually destined to win? Thank you.
The short and final answer to that question is no. Evil is not destined to win. That is the essence of being a Seventh-day Adventist. That is the hope, the certainty that in the end, things will turn out okay. The problem is that often the whole road towards that end, some Adventists think that they know exactly how that will be. They have a whole scenario that is going to play out before the end will come, and they know exactly what will happen to the church, etc. The point is we don't. There are many things that we just have to wait and see. You're worried about many things happening in today's world. I think most of us are. We are surprised at some of the things that some countries do and propose. I could not 10 years ago have dreamed or, well, thought that or feared that things would turn out as they are at present in America. Some of the things that happen in Europe. And it may get worse before it gets better. It may never get better. Who knows? As far as the church is concerned, I don't know what the church will look like 10 years, 20 years from now. And rather than talking about things getting better or things getting worse, I think it starts with being realists, with looking at the way things are. And we have discussed tonight some of the things that they are. There is this diversity. There is often diversity combined with controversy. There is often a lack of understanding, a lack of being willing to accept that we are different. So reality is where we start. And then the challenge is, how do we live with that reality? And how do we, in some of the countries where we have obviously problems with the future of the church, how do we develop strategies that maybe can bring at least a partial turn in the way things have been going? So how do we make sure that this diversity that we have been talking about is not tearing us apart, but is enriching us? That is not simple, but let's try to each of us do a little bit of our best to make that happen.
Thank you so much, Reinder, for such a wonderful presentation. And Lord, before I turn it back to you, we didn't have time for Lynn Boyd to make a comment because I'm under strict orders to try and end closer to 3:30, which I've obviously failed to do. But I want to share his point because I think it's for this country, it's a good way to cap off our discussion today. And he says, for your information, economically, the current USA approach to immigration is damaging. We need more, not less. This affects both the supply and the demand side of the economy. And to that end, he says, according to a recently released study from the conservative Cato Institute, and they are very conservative, I can assure you, between 1994 and 2023, the fiscal surplus from all immigrants from that time period was 14.5 trillion, compared with a deficit of 48 trillion without immigrants. That means that immigrants cut deficits by nearly a third in real terms over the last 3 decades. So there you have it. There you have it, which, and Reinder, you raise your hand, which takes it a level deeper, doesn't it? Okay, if we don't want them, then what are the reasons why? Something good to think about. I appreciate your time so much.
I would add this at the end that right now if it were not for immigrant churches in the United States, the Seventh Adventist Church would be down 25% from the million or so that we have. We should be thanking the Lord for immigrants, and it puzzles me to no end why the cautious silence from the church about the way immigrants are being treated. If they really succeed in pulling out all of our immigrants, the church in the United States is going to just fade away. Hey, everybody, thank you so much. You're lovely. I appreciate you all so much.